When kids just won't listen, parents often feel stuck between two choices: to give in or get angry. It's exhausting. We give you the top techniques directly from the experts, helping you on your path to a more peaceful, respectful, and joyful life with your kids. Bridgett Miller is an educator, remedial therapist, presenter, parent consultant, and an authorized facilitator of the Neufeld Institute. She combines nearly 2 decades of personal experience as a teacher and parent to support adults to nurture the children in their lives using their heads and their hearts. Bridgett is the author of What Young Children Need You to Know, How to See Them So You Know What to Do for Them, which just came out about a month ago. You can find chapters and a little free sample on her website, bridgettmiller.com. She's also the creator of Look with Love and Parenting with Intention on Facebook and Instagram. She's born and raised in South Africa, and she now resides with her husband and 2 daughters in Vancouver, Canada. Today we will cover some topics from her book that have not been discussed much or at all in this podcast, specifically around children ages 5, 6, and 7 who are lying or exhibiting shyness, and how that compares to children of other ages and stages. And now here's Bridgett Miller. All right, Bridgett Miller, welcome to Getting Kids to Listen. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, James. That's a pleasure to be here with you today.
What is it that you love most about working with kids?
Oh my, it would have to be being in their presence. I think it's such a gift to be in their space because they are the most authentic creatures that we'll probably ever meet. They are exuberantly joyful and intensely infuriating, and what you see is what you get. I just love them because they go with the flow. You know, it's one of those things, they think what they say, and there's no holding back with them. You know exactly where you stand, and they really do pull you into enjoying the most basic things. As adults, we tend to rush ahead, and seldom do we slow down and really appreciate the small things. But when you're in a space with them, they remind you to actually stop and look, and you enjoy things so much more.
Yeah, that's I feel the same way. So authenticity.
Yeah, they're very much creatures of emotion. So you really do get into that space with them where they don't have to think before they speak. So you get to see the true selves, which sometimes can feel like a lot because they'll tell you exactly what it is they're thinking.
Yeah, and even when a 5-year-old tries to lie, you can kind of see, even that's almost authentic in a way where it's like, okay, I get it. You know, it's
Yes, well, I mean, we can talk a little bit about where the lying comes from. That has everything to do with their brain development. In terms of where they are, what they want to do is to put their best self forward.
Yeah.
So they don't want to do anything that would sort of disrupt the relationship that they have with us by getting into trouble. So their brain is wired in such a way that they do put forward whatever the dominant thought at the moment is, and they often believe their lies. We think it's very purposeful and intentional, but what they're doing is putting forward what seems to be their biggest truth.
Right. Yeah, they believe it, and another paradigm I sometimes think about it is they're trying new things in a very appropriate way, like just like they're trying to jump off the couch and see how high they can jump. You know, what can I say? Where's the line? And that's, you know, a healthy thing to be doing. Is that?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, lying in a young child before the age of about 5 is completely developmentally normal and expected. Like, it actually shows healthy brain development because they're learning to have two thoughts in the same place at the same time. So part of them wants to tell you the truth, but part of them knows that it could get them into trouble. And it's that inner struggle that they're actually experiencing, which is for us a sign of celebration.
Yeah.
It's like, yay, these little brains are wiring
Right.
up to be able to be big brains one day.
Yeah, it takes
But
a lot
they practice it
of
on
brain
us.
power. Right. It takes a lot
It
of brain
certainly
power
does.
to the language and the, to lie, and then, better watch my body language and all this. It's like a lot going on.
There's an incredible amount going on, but we often misread it. We just think, oh my gosh, we better stamp it out now.
Right.
Because if they're lying to me at 5, what are they going to be doing at 15? But we don't have to project into the future and clamp down too hard at the moment. It's just where they are developmentally.
Yeah. Let's come back to that. Tell us a little bit about the environments that you've worked in with kids.
So I started out as a preschool teacher. That's what my initial training was in. After I'd been in the classroom for a while, I actually went back to university and studied special education, and then back into the classroom again. I just found I had more questions than I had answers. And that led me back to university one more time, and I went and studied psychology. And it was then that I went back into the classroom for a really short time. And then I went off and had my own 2 children. So my experience is firmly rooted in both primary, preschool, and then, of course, just being a parent, which I think have been my biggest lessons.
Yeah. Sounds like you've been a lifelong learner.
I'll never be done.
All right. So those years that you spent in the preschool and the other schools, was that also preschool, or were you doing other ages?
Well, the way that the system works where I was teaching in South Africa, we have preschools separate from what we would call primary schools or elementary schools. Some of my time was in preschools, and then quite a few years, almost 10 years, were in the kindergarten classroom. So I was kind of straddling both worlds. Yeah, that's right.
That's a beautiful time in a human life. 5 and 6, it's a lot going on, isn't it?
Oh, there's so much happening. And I think when you're the teacher or you're the parent of the child, you think it's because you're teaching them so much, but it's actually to do with their little brain developing at such a rapid rate. They're taking so much in that we shouldn't actually be taking credit for it. That's Mother Nature doing her job.
Yeah. And can you tell me about the Neufeld Institute and your role there?
Yes, so the Neufeld Institute has actually been started by a man by the name of Dr. Gordon Neufeld. He is a developmental psychologist here in Vancouver, but he travels the world sharing insight and information, helping parents and educators make sense of their children. So being a developmental psychologist, what he looks at is human potential. And then he helps us to look at it from the perspective of, if a child is not reaching what would be their human potential, what's getting in the way? So it's not about shaping or changing behavior. It's about looking at the needs of the child and what we as the caring adults in their life can do to provide the conditions for them to thrive and grow. So I actually discovered his work when I moved from South Africa to Vancouver. It was like the universe just did me a huge favor, putting me in the physical place where I could actually attend classes and courses in person. And it was through that I just became so excited by everything that he was putting out into the world. And it led me to becoming a facilitator and parent consultant. So I'm not in the classroom anymore. I've progressed to working with adults and helping them to see their children differently.
And help paint a picture of when you're working with the adults. Is that on Zoom, or are they coming to meet you? Are you meeting the kids? How does the format work?
That's actually the question I get all the time. Parents will contact me and say, when can I bring my child to see you? But I actually don't work like that, because the people that I need to be guiding are the ones who are predominantly in the lives of their children. So no, I don't work directly with children, even though that's my background and experience. my focus is on, I do a lot of presentations, sharing with groups. And then I also work individually with parents, either in person or on Zoom or Skype or one of those modalities, helping them to shift their perspective, because a lot of the things that we struggle with in our children, in our everyday lives, are things that are developmentally appropriate, but we are misreading the behavior. So when we shift the way that we're seeing them, we stop trying to do things to them, and instead we meet them where they are, and then we figure out where it is that we need to be going. Always focusing on connection and relationship, because that's the foundation of everything.
So bringing that back to, we were talking about lying a little bit, and I'm again picturing 5-year-old, 6-year-old age. Is it reasonable to look at the ages in such discrete units? I mean, is a 5-year-old's lie much different from a 9-year-old's lie, would you say?
Well, when we're talking about development, we have to keep in mind that all growth is on a continuum. What we expect of a certain age group is pretty generalized, but because each of us are so unique, we're in a different space and a different place. So one of the things that I love so much about Gordon Neufeld's work is that he often says the little phrase, we all grow older, we don't all grow up. So maturity, it comes with time, but the conditions have to be right. So when we're talking about a 5-year-old who's lying, we have to take into consideration where they are developmentally in terms of brain development. A 5-year-old's brain is not yet what we call integrated. So they don't really fully have the capacity to have what we call mixed feelings. So part of me wants to tell you a lie, but part of me doesn't want to. That's a mixed feeling. And when they're in the struggle of that, what happens is they make the decision as to whether or not to tell the truth or the lie. Whatever the predominant thought is in that moment is the one that they put forward. So between the ages of 5 and 7 is when the brain actually fires up and starts to have those mixed feelings. Before the age of 5, they don't even have the capacity. So a 5-year-old lie and a 9-year-old lie, if they are developmentally going on track, are coming from a different place.
So let me see if I caught that. You're calling the ability to have and maybe also to display mixed feelings, you're calling that integrated, and that is kind of comes online at 5 or 6?
Yes, exactly that. It's the brain, the prefrontal cortex, actually the blood starts flowing between the left and right hemisphere. In an average child, if we were just looking at a general, it would happen between 5 and 7 years old. But in a very sensitive child, that might only start happening between 7 and 9. And it's those abilities, the ability to have your mixed feelings, which will give you all the things that we're hoping we will instill in our children in terms of having self-control and consideration, and all those things that we're trying to teach them are actually going to be a result of brain development. It's not so much that we need to be teaching them everything as it is about understanding where they are and meeting them in that space.
So let's talk about maybe an example of what would that look like with the 5 or 6-year-old who's told the lie and the parent's upset, and as we talked about, the kind of immediate reaction is we need to stamp this out. What does meeting them look like?
Okay, meeting them, when I refer to that, it's always considering the relationship first and the emotions that they're having. So those two pieces are going to give us our marching instructions in terms of what it is we need to do. The first thing is to realize that children who lie are doing so because they either want to stay in our good graces, they don't want to get into trouble because that feels awful, and it feels like it goes against the connection. The other thing is they want to stay out of trouble because they don't like maybe the punishment or whatever that might follow. Like there are a lot of reasons that they do it, But meeting them in that space means first acknowledging that they're immature and they're going to make mistakes. Coming down very harshly on a child who has lied to us actually sets them up to fear telling us the truth in the future. Like, if telling the truth gets them into more trouble and their brain integrates, they learn very quickly to tell very elaborate lies or to get very sneaky and not get caught. So what we're wanting to do is make it easy for them to tell us the truth. And when we do that, we open the invitation for us to take in the lessons that we want them to learn. So getting really mad with them in that moment shuts them down to taking in what we actually want them to learn. And very often in the moment, we just get through it. And when our frustration has settled and their upset has settled and we restore the connection, that's when we have our most beneficial conversations. And we can say things like, it's not okay to take that cookie without asking mummy's permission. So a lot of our work is done after the incident and not in the heat of the moment.
So you were saying the first thing is about just acknowledging the maturity in the first place, and that's not saying, hey kid, you're immature. It's an internal understanding of where this child is, and I guess that's just information that every parent should have, and the basics, right?
The very basics. I mean, to raise children, we do not have to be developmental experts.
Right.
That would be unreasonable. Like, nature didn't have that plan. We have a lot of access to information in this era, which is a huge benefit, but not everybody is wanting to learn and understand everything about what drives children to do the things they do. But we need to acknowledge immature children are going to behave in immature ways. And we get ourselves into a lot of trouble with them because we take adult expectations and we put them on children. And very often what we're doing is expecting from them what they can't yet give us because their brains aren't capable of doing what we're asking yet. We need to slow ourselves down and just realize, for now, this is where they are, and they're not always going to be this way.
Yeah, there are a lot of resources just for the basic kind of ages and stages, and maybe the shorter the better in some ways. I mean, I know that sometimes when I visit the doctor's office, you'll see the little brochure, and it's like for your 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old kind of stuff, and I guess a lot of it can fit on an index card. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, well, shorter is always better. Like, if you can just even have a catchphrase that you hang on to in the moment, like, you don't have to understand everything about what's going on in your 5-year-old's brain.
Right.
If you catch them in the middle of a lie or a temper tantrum or any of those behaviors that we consider, unwanted, the only thing you have to go to is, my child is immature. Like, that's all you need. Right. And the mantra that I often carry with me is, do no harm. Like, in that moment, you cannot control a child who cannot control themselves, but you can manage yourself in a way that will get you both through the situation, and you will come out on the other side okay for it. We often, as adults, overreact because we're so sucked into whatever the behavior is that's happening. But we just need to slow down and back off. And James, the other thing I would say is, it's not so much about parenting or teaching from a very cognitive place of understanding things. A lot of what we need is actually just to tap into our inside, into our hearts. Like, when we are responding or reacting in a way that feels wrong to us, it probably is. So it starts with an awareness.
An awareness, and you were talking about getting to a place of connection with the child, and so I'm guessing that has a lot to do with that awareness and that kind of inner awareness of their emotional state, of our own emotional state. And I found it interesting that you were saying if it feels wrong, likely is. And I wonder how many of us are resisting that. We might be afraid to trust our feelings, or think that, we might have the opposite message, that if it feels right, maybe we're not trying hard enough. Do you have any advice around that?
I absolutely love and appreciate what you're saying, because it's exactly that, especially in the heat of a moment. Like anytime we're in a moment and we're overwhelmed, we actually lose our brain integration a lot of the time. Like parents who are enormously frustrated do and say things that they wouldn't ordinarily do if they weren't so frustrated. So very often we're just on autopilot. A lot of the ways or the things that we do to children were done to us as children. And it's a natural thing to go back to what we know, especially in times of stress. But if there is even a little niggle inside of you, you start to pay attention to that. Change always starts with awareness. And sometimes it's sitting outside of the moment. If you've had a big blow up with your child, whether they're 2 or 5 or 15 or 35, and you can make the space for yourself just to sit in the discomfort, the shift will start to happen inside of you, because you're paying attention to how you're feeling, which is a big ask of a lot of people.
Right, sure.
It's much easier to look outside of ourselves and say it's somebody else's fault. Mm. But sitting with our own discomfort, and most of all wanting to do better, becomes the formula for changing our ways. And it's our love for our children that lead us there. We keep showing up because we love them. Very often everything we do is because we love them. But if we misread their behavior, we do things that don't feel like love to children.
Yeah, and also being in that state of doubt or just anger or whatever, it's hard to know what to. Even if it feels wrong, it's hard to know sometimes, like, what do I Google here? Mm-hmm. I know me and my family, we're all just yelling at each other. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's hard to know how to translate what's clearly feels wrong into, here's what I need, here's the request of the information.
Yes, and I would say, I love that you've already said, what do I Google? The minute we come at it from a place of thinking, mm-hmm. we're trying to make sense of it, which is a very good thing, but there is a lot of misinformation on the internet. Like everybody has a tip or a technique or a something, and those are the things that lead us astray, because we have the idea that if it works on one child, then maybe it'll work on my child. And the piece that we miss is that when we apply a technique, we often whittle away at the connection we're wanting to have with our child.
Right. We're a little bit too much technique and not enough. Well, it's an informational approach, and so we're leaving out the kind of awareness connection part.
And therein comes the disconnect, because mm-hmm. everybody will always tell you what you should be doing. Right.
That's here we are. I mean, it's one of the problems of what you and I both do, I believe. Are we telling parents what to do, and how do you help someone connect more?
That is the foundation to everything. This is not about, I don't tell parents what to do. And I often, when I'm giving a general public talk, will start with that, and I'll say, if you've come to be told what to do, you are going to be disappointed. Mm-hmm. Because this is not about me giving you 5 easy tips to go home and transform your child's behavior. This is about looking at what you're currently doing. How is it working against the connection you have with your child? And when we started it from that place, and we understand a little bit of what's developmentally appropriate for children, we automatically start shifting what we're doing, because we are no longer following somebody else's instructions. We start seeing the child in front of us for who they are, rather than an example that needs to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a leap. For a lot of people, that's a leap.
Tell us more about the process in that conversation. I mean, how do you? I'm hesitating not to just throw up what I imagine are defenses and objections and, well, you don't know my child kind of stuff. Is there?
Yes.
What are some of the keys to the process in the way you?
The starting place is to acknowledge we're all doing the best we can with what we currently have, be that resources or information. The common factor between you, me, and everybody else is when we're raising a child, we're doing whatever it is because we believe that it's going to lead to the best outcome for the child. So it comes from a place of wanting the very best for them. But if you're raising a child who, instead of following your lead, is pushing back, instead of appearing to learn, is getting stuck in their big behaviors, that's an indication of whatever it is that we're doing isn't serving the child. That's not because we're not good parents or we aren't trying hard enough. That's because what we're doing isn't working for this child. And it's not about changing the child, it's about meeting them where they are. So when we come from that place of connection, we shift the way we're doing things in order for what we're hoping to teach our child to truly sink in. There are a lot of things we can do to children to change their behavior, but it works at a surface level and it's a short-term fix. Every parent I've ever met wants to raise a child who does the right thing when no one's looking, because that's true growth and true maturity and integrity. We can't teach those things to children. We have to grow them in them.
How is it that we build that muscle, if that's a fair analogy, of coming from a place of connection? How do we make that more of a habit, or more of a, where do we start, do you think?
Well, I think the quickest and easiest place to begin is to understand that whenever we take children's behavior personally, we come at it from a wounded place. We want to jump down, we want to fix it, we want to control it, we want to change it. Anytime it feels personal to us, and I'm talking about even a 3-year-old who looks at you and says, I hate you, and I wish you were deaded. Harsh things like that, it's coming from a place of immaturity and it's valid expression. Like in that moment, they really do hate you because you're the one who said no to another cookie. It's not personal. It's just coming from that place that they want you to know how they feel. So everything I'm talking to in terms of fostering connection is understanding that it's coming from a place of emotion. Like when we can invite children to have their big emotions, what we do is we invite them to grow, because they take up a relationship with themselves and then their brain integrates, and that leads them to that place of maturity. So our foundation is always to look at, what am I doing in this situation that could be working against the connection that I want to have with my child? When we're being really harsh and punitive, or shaming or blaming, we're working against the relationship. It doesn't feel good to be led by a person who doesn't see the best in you.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement about that, about the source of that approach, and just so curious on all the different ways to communicate that and help people with that. So I hear you're saying, a lot of it starts with this kind of acknowledgement and this information of what is maybe true for everyone, is as you're saying, we're doing our best. The kid is at a certain level of maturity. You're at a certain level of maturity. and just kind of getting comfortable with that. If that's new information to people, kind of taking that in and getting comfortable with that. And
Just
go
listening
ahead.
to you, I think there's something that would probably help put it into some sort of context as well.
Sure.
Is to understand that when children are born to us or they come to us as newborns or infants or any age, but particularly when they're very young, they arrive pre-programmed and wired to attach to us for their very survival. Like it's on a purely physical, they need us and they're in that space of dependence. They're also wired to look to us and to love us because their survival depends on it. So from that perspective, we are put in the position of being the ones to lead and guide them. And they're wired to take that guidance from us. And that's why we need to preserve the connection. Like a child who arrives ready and willing doesn't need to be punished or whatever else in order to get them to learn. It's through the connection and them wanting to be like us that they follow us. But along the way, we undo that because we look outside of ourselves for contrived methods of teaching. Like they want to be the best they can be for us, especially when they are little, because they love us. And we must never forget that.
How much of the, let's just call it a disconnect. Let's say there's the opposite of connection between a parent and child.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that do you think is it fair to attribute to the course of the day, the length of the school day and the length of the work day? It's a question I'm always wondering is
Mm-hmm.
if someone's only seeing their kid for 3 hours a day, if you're excluding, I don't know, whatever activities, do you think that that's something that we can overcome with the connection that we bring to the small moments, or is there, I don't know, is there a natural deficit there with the time away? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I hear what you're asking me. When we're looking at it through that lens of attachment, the very thing that we all fear the most is separation from those that we love and are attached to. Just by nature of the way our world works, the reality is parents have to drop their kids off and go off to earn a living. That's just a fact and a very real part of a lot of people's lives. That's not any fault of ours, but nature has a way of overcoming that. And that is through that connection. When a child is attached to us and they grow, they go through different levels of attachment. Young children, they rely on being physically close to us in order to feel loved and taken care of and to feel safe and secure. But the more deeply they attach to us, the bigger the physical gap can get. So for some children, going to school is hugely wounding because they experience that physical separation as being too much. The source of our greatest frustration is in separation in relationships. So when children get sent off to school, they miss the people that they love the most. And they store up often all their frustration for when we pick them up and that connection is restored. That's often why parents have the hardest time when they pick up children from daycare or school. It's like they've saved up all that frustration and it just goes boom. And what we miss is that is a backhanded compliment to relationship. Like they are saving it up for the people that they love and trust the most. But going back to that question of what do we do with this, like we can attach to them in so many different ways. As they become older and more mature, just being able to hold on to the feeling of being loved by us gets them through the school day. So we find ways to keep the connection going. Maybe we put a note in their lunch pack. It's not a matter of how much time we necessarily spend with them because we don't all have the gift of a lot of time. But it's the the feeling that they have when they are with us, that sinks in and restores that connection. And then we can send them back out into the world.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm summarizing this wrong. You're saying that from the kind of attachment theory perspective, the stronger and better that connection from the beginning to wherever the child is now in their development, the easier it is for them to be able to go away and come back in a without the frustration and without the tantrum afterwards, because they have kind of that safe base in their experience and in their own. They're carrying that around with them everywhere they go. They know that school day ends at a certain time, and I get to go to back to this place of attachment. Is that?
Yes and no. Like, we're never going to, there's no amount of connection that's going to override a child's tantrum, because that's where they are developmentally. Like, they have to express themselves in that big way. But as the connection deepens, they trust us more, and they can take our love with them. So that enables them to hold on when we're apart. Like, I can move across the world from South Africa to Canada and still feel as loved by my parents as if I was with them physically. And that's the point of deep attachment. When that relationship and the love truly sinks in, relationship is forever, even when the other people depart. Like, when people pass away and die, if you've had a deep connection with someone and you felt loved by them, you will retain that. Like, even in your behaviors, you would think, oh, that would make mom so proud, or
Right.
oh, dad would really like that. That's a feeling that we take with us. And it's also what empowers us to show up and be our best, because those people loved us in such a way that we wanted to be our best. It's a huge, huge topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe we can refocus a little bit from such a big topic. I was flipping through your book, which just came out 1 month ago, and that is called "What Young Children Need You to Know," right?
That's
and
it.
the subheading is "How to See Them So You Know What to Do for Them."
Mm-hmm.
And I found that curious subtitle, "How to See Them." So again, in my mind, that's kind of it's an awareness and connection thing, if I understand right. There were a couple other points in that book I wanted to get to, and maybe you can pick one of your favorites here. One was around shyness and what that means and how important or not important it is, and another was around how stories help us connect.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to kind of talk to us about either one of those, or maybe just pick one and go into it?
Yes, of course. Well, I think just to be able to expand a bit on what I mean in that subtitle about how to see them, so you know what to do with them, shyness is a really, really powerful example of that. Like, we live in a world where we venerate people who are outgoing,
Right.
and out there, because we see them as the leaders and the people who are the change makers, because they're so big and bold and present and don't appear to have a shy bone in their bodies. So when we have children who are cowering behind us and don't want to make eye contact with somebody, that can trigger in us a bit of a fear that there's something wrong with this child and I need to make them different so that they can be successful in the world. So that in the moment is our perception. It's coming from a really caring place. We want to help them in order to make them more successful, or whatever the word is that we put to it. And we take that on as a sense of responsibility. But what we're not seeing is that shyness is actually an instinct. We're all born with shyness. And the reason that we are is because it's supposed to keep us safe by keeping us close to the people who will take care of us and have our best interests at heart. So children, particularly young children, aren't supposed to just go with anyone. That's how children get led away from their village. Like if they just follow anybody because they're immature, that would get them into a lot of trouble. So Mother Nature has inbuilt this instinct which keeps them close to those who care for them the most. And parents misread this as thinking it's a deficit when actually it's not. So the way that we overcome shyness is not by telling our child to look at the lady and say hello, or look at the lady and say thank you, trying to force those things. Instead, what we see is this child is being true to who they are. Their instinct is moving them to back away. And when the relationships with others start to happen and deepen and they feel safe and secure, they expand their circle and they appear less shy with those that they're more comfortable with. So a lot of children are clowns at home. They'll sing and they'll dance and they'll do everything, but put them outside of their home, they become meek little mice. That's an instinct that's at play because it's there to protect them, but it's overcome when connection is strong and they feel safe. So that's the beginning. Ask me a question.
What do you think about the notion that when we see, again, let's say the child's being shy, that, you had mentioned it triggers in us, what's wrong with my child is the thought. And I also like to think about how directly it might trigger in us, oh, I remember being that child. A very direct, oh, I'm afraid now too, because I was that age, and it's kind of blows right past all of our filters. And suddenly we're having the emotion that the child's having. And we thought we outgrew that 30 years ago. And so I think that it might explain a lot of our kind of triggering, our kind of reactions.
That is so beautifully said. That's exactly it. And that's why I'm saying when we do things to our children, it's not from a place of malice. It's because we want to protect them, often from the experiences that we found wounding too, or the things that we feel we haven't resolved in ourselves. But this is the part where we can trust that nature is doing its job. In terms of overcoming shyness, when the brain integrates and those mixed feelings kick in, children find what we call true courage. Because part of me wants to, for example, in a preschool situation, part of me wants to show and tell or share this item with the class, but part of me is too scared to. And when they're able to hold their fear and their desire in the same place, that's when true courage shows up. For many of us, that doesn't really happen until much later in life, if we're lucky. I can use myself as an example. I was a very shy child. I didn't go through school asking questions. I managed to get through high school and university asking very few questions because I didn't want to be the center of attention. But when I found something that meant so much to me, which is this work that I share, my true courage showed up because my want to put it out into the world is bigger than my fear of showing up to do it. And that's why I can appear very socially out there and willing to do when I'm not. Like by nature, I'm much happier at home. But true courage comes from that place of growth and maturity, right, and finding our own reasons. So a shy child doesn't need to be told off for being shy or made to feel that something's wrong with them because they're shy and another child isn't. We all have varying degrees of shyness, but it's through connection and attachment and brain integration that naturally resolves itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well put. You have heard a lot of, like you said, plenty of advice on the internet and plenty of competing maybe theories or maybe just out in the world. is there anything, what is some advice that you hear that you think people should not follow?
That's a huge question. I would say to parents or anyone who has children in their lives that they love and care about to avoid any method or technique that sounds too good to be true. Like when we're in a place of panic and we just want to fix something, the first thing we grapple for are quick fix solutions. But anything that's quick fix usually comes at a price because development can't be hurried. True development takes a lot of time and a lot of patience, and it's a very loud and a very messy road. And it's meant to be that way. There is no fast track to maturity. So anytime you're Googling or you're speaking to someone at the play park or your mother-in-law, whoever it is, offers you up a tip or a trick or a method, very often what it's doing is working against what the child needs most. And when I say that, it's again going back to that attachment. If it's a technique that uses what a child cares about against them, that's contrived power over a child, and it works against attachment. So when we do things like take things away or send children away, a child's biggest need is to be physically with us when they're very young, or to feel that they are seen and valued in our presence. So anytime we, for example, time out a child, what we are saying is, I can't make you do what I want, but I know what you care about the most, and that's what I'm going to take away from you. When they get a little bit older, we start taking away things. And that's what I'm saying in terms of pay attention on the inside. If you're grappling for contrived power, what can I take away to make this child behave? That feeling inside of you is the thing you need to be paying attention to. Children learn best, as I've said 100 times, through connection. And we don't need to sabotage the relationship with them in the long term by changing their behavior quickly now. Anytime we do that, what we're doing is really undermining the true power that we have through connection. We don't want to do things that knock out their caring feelings. They have to have their caring feelings if they are to make the way in the world. When we take something away, we can change behavior because the child is attached to that something. And they will do whatever they can to get it back some of the time. But when we repeatedly use a technique like that, the child actually starts to back out of relationship.
Right.
And they'll say things like, I don't care.
Right. It's not worth it.
I don't care. Mm-hmm. And then as a parent, you're thrown in that position of, oh gosh, I've got to do something. So you say, well, fine, you're not going to have your iPad for 2 days. And a child who is true to themselves will look you in the eye and say, I don't care. And then the parent goes, well, that's fine. You're not going to have it for 3 days. And the child holds true to themselves. Sometimes they'll buckle, depending on the attachment to whatever it is. But a child who is truly driven to not being pushed around will stand their ground and say, I don't care. And then the parent throws up their hands and they go, well, I don't know what else to do to this child. It's just an indication of how far gone a quick fix technique is. It'll run its span and then we're done. And sadly, after we've done those things, then we've damaged the relationship because now we want to hold true. We don't want to give in. So we withhold the iPad for an extra week. And all that time, the child is stewing and brewing, and then they move on. But we're the ones who are still stuck in it. So just pay attention. Techniques can do a job, but we have to ask ourselves, at what cost?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess eventually those weeks become months and years, and then you're holding a grudge for a decade, in adult life when you could have had a.
Sadly it does. Those days turn into weeks, and it's the constant feeling of disconnect. Young children have no choice because they depend on us. But as our children grow, if home doesn't feel like a safe space, they can take themselves and go elsewhere.
Right.
And then you don't have a relationship when they are older.
Right.
Not through anything that you meant to do. Everything you were doing was with the intention of teaching them. But if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. And there are so many alternatives. You just have to be open and willing to look for them.
It's a beautiful message. Let's listen to our feelings and reach out anytime it doesn't feel right.
And James, just to put that in a nutshell, to say that we are here to teach just as much as we are to learn from our children. Like the very things that they trigger in us very often is our unfinished business.
Mm-hmm.
And by showing up for them, what we do is we show up for ourselves. Like the number of parents who've sat with me in a workshop who have arrived there in order to understand their children, at the end, when we get to a discussion, it's like light bulbs have gone off and they say, this is not about my child, this is about me.
Right.
And our children are here to help us with that, but we have to be open to paying attention and looking and doing the work. There's a huge amount of vulnerability required to look at ourselves and say, gosh, yeah, this is my unfinished business and I'm dumping it on my child. But if you show up to figure them out in order to help them, you help yourself along the way, and then you grow up together.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of your favorite resources, and then we'll get to your book specifically. But obviously you're a fan of Neufeld and what the Institute and the books.
Yes, so the overarching resource I would refer people to is to the neufeldinstitute.org. What you'll find there is everything I'm saying in huge depth. The Neufeld Institute offers online courses. They have tons and tons of resources, all coming at raising children through a developmental and attachment lens. For parents of young children, my colleague Deborah McNamara has written a book called Rest, Play, Grow, Making Sense of Preschoolers or Anyone Who Acts Like One. So you don't have to be a preschooler body to have a preschooler mindset. Another one would be Hold On to Your Kids, which is written by Gordon Neufeld and Gabor Mate. And then there's just been a recent release, also by two colleagues of mine, Hannah Beach and Tamara Strychak, called Reclaiming Our Students, which is everything I've shared, but looking at it through the school perspective. How can educators invite connection with their students in order to help them learn and grow at school? And I would say those would be my top go-tos.
Great. Okay, and that's all at neufieldinstitute.com, or?
You'll find everything there and links to other things too, other resources as well, yes.
Okay. And then there's your book. Just came out, hot off the presses.
Hot off the press, yeah.
What young children need you to know.
That's it. And the reason I've said young children is just because the examples that I've used are primarily for young children, but the messages inside there are relevant to any age. So the way that I've written it is a quick and easy read. It's got 55 chapters, which sounds like a lot, but every chapter is just 2 or 3 pages.
Excellent.
And they're independent topics. They stand alone. So if you're struggling with the shyness or the lying or the tantrums or whatever else, there's just a quick hit of insight and hopefully inspiration. And I've broken it up into 2 different sections. One section would give you a story and the developmental insight. And then there's a little part that says, here's what you can do. And it doesn't speak to exactly step by step what to do. It speaks to how I can be with my child. And hopefully it'll find its way into the hands of parents who are open to seeing things differently.
Hopefully. Okay, so kind of one part with the information, and then one part with the actionable, like you were saying, how to be with the child. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and then if anybody's interested in having a little sneak peek, if they go to my website bridgettmiller.com, There's actually a free download of the introduction, which gives the overarching view of what this is going to be about, and then a list of all the different chapter titles, and then the first 5 chapters of the book.
That's great. BridgettMiller.com.
That's it.
Cool. We are going to put every book that we mentioned, everything that we talked about, we'll put links people can find in the comments of YouTube, in the comments, the description of the show. So it should be easy for them to click on through and check out your work. That's great that you're putting the 5 chapters you said, so people can see what it's all about, and you've listed the chapters out so they can know what they're getting.
Yes, it's always important to know what you're getting into. And then just to say, if anybody wants quick hits of inspiration, they can visit me on Facebook or Instagram at Look with Love Bridgett.
Okay. We'll be sure to link all of that. Anything else? Any parting thoughts? Anything that you wish we had gotten around to that we didn't get around to?
I think my leaving message would just be to parents or anyone who has young children in their lives to keep in mind that they don't need a perfect adult in their world. All they need is someone who loves them like you do.
Yeah. So increase that connection and find a way to be with them. The rest will click in. Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Well,
thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. It's a big conversation, and
absolutely,
and just to take what resonates and leave the rest behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm hoping that we can do that here. We bring a lot of different voices, and what rings true for some people might not always ring true for others, but there's a lot of different types of kids out there and a lot of different strategies for working with them. So really appreciate everything you bring to that. And again, thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. And everybody who's listening, thank you. We'll see you next time. All right. Have a good day. Bye.